All right, everybody, thank you so much for coming. We're going to kick off. Welcome to the event today. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and the Yalukit, Wallam and Boonwurrung people as the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. These are two of the five major language groups of the Greater Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their land, their ancestors and their elders past, present and emerging. Thank you. Give yourselves a big round of applause for finding this place. This is definitely one of the more interesting places I've done a gig. When I told my friends come to this dingy car park, they're like, wow, 2020 really wrecked your career. But it's good to be here. I used to get my early bird parking up here back when I had an office job. So we've really transformed the space. So a little bit about MPavilion. It is Australia's leading architectural commission and an initiative of the Naomi Milgram Foundation. So every year they go and put pop-ups in places around Victoria and they have events there. And then after that, they go and place those pop-ups in permanent spots where the public can enjoy that piece of architecture forever. So this year instead, they've gone and created some pop-ups like this in places where people wouldn't think to go and consume art, and they're reusing some of the previous 6 pop-ups as well for new talks. So this is going to be a really wonderful night. It's called the Self-Dating Panel. We've got some wonderful guests here, and this was all organised by a bunch of young people aged 16 to 25 as part of the M Curators group. So give them a big round of applause. And this month is a month of love. It's February. Valentine's Day is coming up shortly. So I want to do a little survey. Give me a cheer and a bit of applause if you're single. Very good. Give me a cheer and a clap if you are in a relationship. Less enthusiastic for some reason. And everybody else who did not clap, give me a clap and a cheer. Polyamory, maybe. I can't wait to learn from the speakers that we have here today. Let me introduce them for you. So sitting here to my right, I have Samantha Moss, founder and director of Moss Folk, a non-for-profit run for and by young people with mental illness. Moss Folk's resources and events and workshops are affordable, accessible, ethical and sustainable, and it was founded through Sam's lived experience of mental illness. She also worked as a visual merchandiser and stylist for 5 years and combined this with mental health advocacy. As you can tell, this is a strong theme here. You look like an artwork, or art teacher, or just generally love the shoes, which she says is the first time wearing them today. So good that you're sitting down. We can all relate. And over to her right, we have Nevo Zissin, who has been a Jewish, queer, non-binary writer, activist and public speaker, according to their website, who was assigned female at birth and transitioned to present as male at the age of 17. They run workshops on trans issues and have written 2 books, Finding Nevo and The Pronoun Lockdown. They are also...
Lowdown. Lockdown is really effective.
Sorry, Freudian slip. It really has.
You're not the first person. People are like, can't wait for the pronoun lockdown. I'm like, it's not that prescriptive.
Yeah, true. And they are also a marriage celebrant, so I can't wait to chat to you about that because I also went and did this course and am now a marriage celebrant after a breakup, which was a bad decision to be surrounded by people in love. And over to their right, we have Laura Miano, sexologist, sex therapist, and sex columnist for Fashion Journal. She has appeared twice on Triple J's The Hookup, one of my favourite programs to listen to, all about sex, love, and relationships. And the segments that she appeared on were titled How to Get Back into the Dating Game After a Breakup, Need That Advice, and How to Hook Up at Festivals, which was in 2019. So probably not as relevant today. So welcome. Give it up for the panel. We'll be having a conversation for 45 minutes, and then at the end, the last 15 minutes, I encourage you to think of some questions that you can ask, and we'll just rove around and give the mic to anyone who would like to chat. So let's kick it off. I think some of the themes that I saw coming out of your bios was identity. So I'm keen to know, what is your relationship with self-care and self-love in general, and how did you come to be the person that you are today?
Me? That's a huge question. In terms of self-care and self-love and how that connects with my identity, I think like most people, I spent most of my teens and early 20s just really hating the shit out of myself. Just any part of me I could hate, I did hate. So I kind of really began my journey with, ongoing journey with self-care and self-love, just deciding not to hate myself and that my time is better spent doing other things. And now it's very, I don't know, tied in with who I am in that I'm constantly trying to discover what I love and what brings me joy and what things I do connect with as care.
And what have you found that those things were? How did you eliminate the ones you didn't like?
It was just trying so many different things and not doing the things I didn't like. I've most connected with kind of arts and crafts and different creative things that are just for me. And then there's more basic care like napping and sleeping and taking baths and cuddles with my cat. And it's just, deciding to actively take that time to learn what I enjoy and what I actually want to be doing and what things I can find that are just for me.
Yeah, and Navor, you've got an incredible journey coming to terms with your identity, but at a very young age, you sort of knew already who you were. So what were some of the things that you would do to self-care through that period that was very tumultuous?
Yeah, I think teenage angst can really help in self-love because as a trans and queer young person with people hating you, the natural response is to love the shit out of yourself because it'll really piss people off. And so I guess really radically loving myself really in people's faces was a really good way to say fuck you to all of the people who didn't accept or understand my transitions and journeys, even if I didn't believe it. I think like self-care and self-love can be really performative for a while until it just eventually marinates inside of your chest. And so I feel like I just kind of led by this performative confidence until eventually I was like, I am hot and I am beautiful and I am worthy. And I think if you tell yourself those things enough times and if you meet people who are similar to you and you tell them that enough times, it becomes real. And I think like something I found really useful has been social media hygiene and like being really aware of the people and the bodies that I am consuming on my timelines and on my Instagrams, and if they're always like white, able-bodied, cis people, then like I'm going to associate that as the standard of beauty. But to see more hairy, femme, trans babes who are just like going about their lives and being really hot, I'm like, if you're really hot, then maybe I'm really hot. And I think that's been really helpful for me. But I think self-care and self-love, as you said, is really a full-time job. Like it's something that as soon as you feel like you've reached the pinnacle of, you've probably fallen off the bandwagon a little bit, and you sort of have to be constant. It's a bit like cognitive behavioral therapy. Like you have to be consistently checking in with the language that you're using about yourself and the way that you're relating to yourself, the pressure that you're putting. As soon as you like stop for a moment, that's when you kind of fall off a little bit.
Yeah, I want to bookmark the social media stuff because that's something that we're all across at the moment. But speaking of excellent social media, the next person down the line, I would like to introduce you all to Laura Miano. And so tell me about your self-care routines or how you came to where you are now.
Yeah, I think for me, self-care kind of started with being curious and having an open mind and trying different things, seeing what would really work. And I think it's also about having patience, making sure that you're not getting too fed up with something that's not working. I think it's just being really curious. And eventually you also find your boundaries and you find where some things work but some things don't. And I think for me that was like really my big thing with especially studying sexology, learning that I can talk about sexuality, but then I also have very strong boundaries where things aren't okay. And really being able to firstly understand those, but then communicate them as well and be quite practical in how I make sure that I'm like honouring them.
Yep. So I'll open it up to the floor for the rest of the discussion. I feel like coming out of lockdown, we spent so much time alone, and it's become, we talk about this alone time, but is it too much? Is there a point where we need to actually be around other people?
Yeah, I would say definitely. Like, we're such social beings, and, there is a point, like, having that alone time is super important, but I also think you need to reach out to people. And in lockdown, that was really interesting because you couldn't really do that face-to-face unless you went for a walk, but making an intentional calling people, messaging people, I think that was quite a strong realization for me and like a lot of my friends throughout lockdown, like how much you really need that like social network.
Even as introverted people, we need to reach out and chat to somebody. How did you go? I don't know if you are introverted, extroverted, but did you find that it was challenging?
Thank you. I mean, I'm an introvert with social anxiety, so I kind of assumed that lockdown would be heaven for me. But it really made me realize how much I have come to, rely on my community and the people around me for that support. And, it was first of all discovering new ways to connect with community and people, but it did also really make me realize how much I did need to have those, little self-care rituals and kind of methods of self-dating to be okay by myself and to be able to support myself. I think at the start of lockdown, it kind of hit me how much I had let those things fall away because I was relying on my community so much. So, yeah, it was a really interesting just period for me, sometimes really loving it and not having to see anyone. And then...
Yeah, definitely. It comes through in waves. What about you, Navor?
I'm non-binary, so I'm not extroverted or introverted. I'm somewhere in the middle. It's a spectrum. But I guess, I'm a big community-minded person, and I think community building is what really keeps me going. But at the same time, I feel like lockdown was an opportunity to assess which of those relationships were reciprocally fulfilling for me and which were just a drain on my energy. And, I don't need things to be tit for tat exactly, but I think there were quite a lot of relationships I felt like I was in that I was giving a lot in a lot of different factions and not receiving very much back. But I think it was quite interesting because I had a really bad kind of devastating breakup at the end of 2018 and feel like I had to build myself up brick by brick. Had lockdown happened in 2019, I think it would have been a really different situation, but it just so happened that I spent a whole year cultivating my own integrity and doing a lot of really practical work on loneliness and what it means to feel lonely, what it means to feel alone, how to feel self-assured, which was something I felt very confident in before my breakup, and then it just kind of bleeds you dry, which is indicative of the fact that healing is not linear and that we really are on this journey in a very cyclical way. And I guess because of that, I was able to get to a point where I was like, fuck, I love spending time with myself. No one has my back like I do. No one knows the intricacies of my spirit like I do. No one can hold all of the parts of myself throughout my whole life like I can. And I just really enjoyed my own company. I was like, I am stoked to be in lockdown with you, and I'm so glad we're here together.
I love what you're saying. I need some practical tips because you raised a lot of different things, and I'm like, how do I do that? Give me a step-by-step guide.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different things you can do, but I've found relationship podcasts have been really helpful for me. So there's one called Multi-Amory, which goes into a lot of really good tips and tricks for communication. And after my breakup and my ex being really toxic, I was convinced that I was really manipulative. And so I tried to do a lot of work to figure that all out and did as much work as I possibly could, and then was like, actually, I think you were. And I would never say that to her, obviously, because I'm terrified of her. But I did a lot of that work. I think relying on communities. And I think also, as you said, I really resonated with curiosity. I think this sounds really heavy, but the will to live is not because you like love living. It's because you're curious enough to see what will come next. And I think that has really driven me. Like, I don't have to be like all posy core, like I'm always happy. I just have to be curious about what's around the corner. And so I think curiosity really leads me, like connecting with nature and discovering what is out there. It's just like little bursts of joy every day.
Yeah, I discovered a median strip next to my house that I love now, and it's just like a shitty piece of grass. I'm like, I never hung out here ever until lockdown, and it's my territory now. I pee on it regularly. No, I'm just kidding. So, Laura, yourself as well, how did you go through lockdown and what were you getting up to? Did you have a revelation in this similar sense?
In lockdown, I was doing my master's, so I was so busy, I barely almost realised it was lockdown, but also at the same time, I was out in the Otways. I'd planned to go there before COVID happened, and just study. So when COVID came, I was like, okay, gonna do that now. It was definitely tough, not having my social network really close. But in terms of revelations, I don't really think I did, because I think my mind was just study.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
Yeah.
Some people didn't experience anything that was mind-blowing, maybe because you've worked on yourself already or it's not the time yet. But I do think that we spent a lot of time on social media, so let's get on to that. What is your relationship with social media, and how do you think that has affected, in particular, mental health during this time?
Well, I haven't been on social media for over a month now, I think because my relationship with it became, I'm still stalking, I'm still in there, I'm still present, but just not actively doing anything. I don't know, I do think having my whole community and all of my social interactions through social media during lockdown was really difficult. And I think just consuming so much knowledge through that little screen all day, every day, did have quite a bad impact on my mental health. So now I'm actually trying to figure out how to have a healthy relationship with social media, if anyone has any tips. And yeah, I guess how to use it for that amazing community that it can create without it getting too toxic. And I have no answers. I'm still figuring it out. But yeah, it definitely, I think, was a tipping point where I was like, I do have to kind of completely redesign my relationship with social media.
Because it can give you a lot of confidence and self-esteem when you're posting stuff, and a lot of the time I've seen a lot of people that's become like our pacifier to not have to deal with our internal issues. Yeah, I don't know about your thoughts, Laura, because you've got such a successful page as well, always posting sex tips. I don't see a lot of selfies of you, but you've got a lot of other people's content and using it to promote positively, like queer social accounts and other sexologists as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's like a little bit of a love-hate relationship. I really love sharing information and educating people, so much. So I get such a kick from that. But then there's also that kind of dark side where it's like you get likes and all that stuff is just like that dopamine kind of flooding your brain. And yeah, I kind of have a plan that eventually I'll have a work phone where I put my work Instagram and I can just work on it during the day. And then when I go home, that's not near me. So I'm really just being present. Yeah, because I definitely know myself. I can just be scrolling sometimes late at night and yeah, don't want that.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk self-dating now. Have you taken yourself on a date recently?
Funny you say that, actually. I was talking about this with a friend. I used to always do it when I was living overseas. Just felt like that confidence to go out and take myself to a nice restaurant. But actually being in Melbourne and being, where there's friends and I could bump into someone, I feel like I don't do that here. And yeah, it's funny. I think you would think that being in your own city and...
Is it because of the confidence you get from not knowing anybody? That you could be anywhere at any time, no obligations?
Yeah, I think so. It's like no one has any preconceived ideas of you. No one will catch you off guard. You're like, I'm just a free spirit here.
Yeah, I during lockdown moved out to Warrandyte, so I feel like I've managed to cultivate that I don't know anyone here, and that's been really beautiful. So I mean, even when I only had a 5K radius, there was just like rivers and nature walks everywhere around me. So I feel like I take myself on dates quite a lot. Today I went on a walk on my own and I ended up like looking at a tree, which I've only recently learnt what it is, and this little old lady came up and was like, do you know what that tree is? And I was like, I actually do. And then we ended up speaking for like 30 minutes and I discovered that I'm a retiree and all my hobbies align perfectly with this little old white woman. And she was like, have you been to the fungi workshop? And I was like, no, where is it? Oh my God. And we spent
Now you're on a date with this lady and
yeah,
you're having a great
it
time.
was
You're in
a self-date, but it was like we
now.
were both self-dating ourselves together. We became very close and I learnt a lot. But yeah, I think the more that I've been starting to engage with nature as well, like I was very much growing up in my family, no one was into gardening, no one cared about nature. It was like, there's a tree, there's a bird, there's a this, and I was very much like that. And now I can identify them a little, like slowly, like different things, and it just opens up this whole world of wonder where you're like, it's not just a tree, it's like, it's an oak tree or it's a eucalypt. And I feel like dating myself has been a lot about like going out on nature walks and talking to myself. And I also like write letters to myself a lot, which is, I find really helpful. It sounds a little bit crazy, but
Is it
like,
for a
who is
future
it?
date when you open it and read it again?
No, not necessarily. I think it's when I feel like a dissonance within myself, or if I'm having a really hard day and I'm like, Nev, what's going on? Like, why
But
are you
different to journaling
being
or
like
writing
this?
a diary. Entry.
Yeah, because it's more directive. It's like really writing to myself and that writing back from myself. And
Yep.
I found that that's really helped to cultivate empathy for myself, because I think that we're really nasty to ourselves in a way that we never would be to another person. So
Absolutely, yeah.
when I think about myself in the third person, I'm like so much kinder. Like if I was gonna stay home from work, for example, and I'm like, oh, I'll stay home from work, I'm sick and I'll look after myself, there's like this feeling of guilt that builds up. Whereas if I'm like, Nev's feeling a bit sick, I think I'm gonna stay home, make them a soup, maybe run them a bath and just like look after them. I'm like, oh my God, I have the best boyfriend ever. And it's just this really beautiful way of like extending the empathy that I feel like is locked off when I just think about myself as in the me, so in the first person.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Sam, if you were to pick an ideal self-date, what would it look like?
Oh my gosh, I love dating myself. I'm the best date like possible, if I may say so. I think because I moved to Melbourne by myself and I didn't know anyone, I've just always done it and not, maybe I should have been embarrassed this whole time that I'm just out by myself. I love going to the movies by myself. It's just my favorite thing to do. You can pick what movie, like you don't have to compromise on movie, can get all the popcorn and food I want and no one will judge me. And then you can also like cry in the dark if you want, but I mean that's a whole
I do that at home. Don't have to go to the cinema.
But yeah, definitely I love taking myself to the movies. I also do really enjoy taking myself out for dinner, and I usually just take a book and eat yummy food, and it's just, I just love,
Yeah.
maybe it's just deciding what food I get to eat. That seems to be the common theme
Yeah.
for all my self-dates.
Did you have any anxiety when you first started doing it? Like, you know, I'm nervous to go to a restaurant by myself because I know some people I am friends with find that very intimidating, waiting for food to come. If I challenge myself to not look at my phone, and if I haven't brought a book, that is just like, oh my God, social death. How do you deal with it?
I mean, I think again because many years ago when I moved to Melbourne, I didn't know anyone, so it was a lot easier to go out by myself and feel like I wasn't being watched or judged. I mean, I probably did initially take a book with me. I think I've gotten okay with not having a book and just hanging out by myself. I just love food, so I just focus on the food. I mean, that's my tip, just like really enjoy that
Yeah.
meal.
So if you want to be distracted, order a lot of food.
Oh, so much
on a
food.
self-date.
Honestly, I actually
Love
did that
it.
yesterday and it was amazing.
Oh, so
It's so
good.
weird that people are more embarrassed about dating themselves than like dating
Eating.
shit guys though.
okay, yeah.
Like if
thought
you're
you were
out on
saying-
a date with a really shit dude, like maybe you should be embarrassed. Like
Yeah.
it's better to be on your own than to be with someone
It's so
shit.
true. Yeah, like bad conversation is way worse than
Like
being
that
by
reflects
yourself.
way more on you than being on your own. I bet if people are looking at you, they're like, oh, I wish I could be on my own and not with this shit dude.
Just give that a moment to sit. I hope someone's taking notes or like live tweeting this because there's some serious gold. I want to put a question to you all. Do you feel you need to love yourself before someone else can love you?
No? don't think so. I still wouldn't be with someone if that were the case. But I also think it's not like loving yourself is not this destination that you get to and you love yourself for the rest of your life. Like you can love yourself, enter a relationship, and then fall out of love with yourself. I don't think it's something that when it happens, it's forever. It's very non-linear and constantly ongoing, and it's constantly work. And I think, I don't know, I think that narrative has kind of gone too far the other way, where, I mean, it's really hard to love yourself. So I don't know, I think it can also help having someone to connect with and kind of, you know, share who you are with and help, I don't know, in a way, like build who you are and kind of solidify that identity. Yeah, I don't know, it is really interesting.
Yeah, I think when you enter a new relationship, no matter if you do love yourself or you don't, you will learn something new from them, because when you go into a relationship, you kind of, you understand yourself in relation to that new person. So you really have no idea what that person can bring out in you. So whether you do love yourself or not, I feel like you can't predict what this new person is going to bring out in your personality, like what parts of their personality trait are going to ignite other parts of yours. So yeah, I think it's as you said, Sam, it's like a constant ongoing learning process, and it's never something that you kind of get to and then it's like, okay, I can date now. Yeah, it's ongoing.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with both of you more. I think it really is non-linear, and if that's the goal that you're like waiting to get to before you're with someone, then like good luck. And I think also like self-love has become such a sort of capitalist like catch call, and I think we also really need to recognize that loving yourself happens at really different degrees depending on your life experiences. And I think it's like one thing for maybe a white cis able-bodied skinny woman to say that she loves herself versus like an Aboriginal person living on stolen land in a country that still treats them like shit. Like self-love is not an easy thing to cultivate when you have lots of different intersections and experiences of the world, and when that world is still working against you every single day. So the idea that like you have to love yourself first is like a really shitty individualized way of looking at things. And I think as a trans person and as like a femme person as well, I don't think I would have come into that if it wasn't for having many lovers who like taught me that I was beautiful and that I deserved love and that I was worthy. I don't think I would have done that on my own, and I certainly wouldn't have done that without my friends. So the idea that this is like an individual thing is like almost capitalist in itself. Like if you buy all the right makeup, then you'll love yourself. It's like, I think it is a process, and I think also what you were saying of like the self is not a static. Like there are many selves, and some of yourselves you will love and some of them you won't, and you will work on. And not loving parts of yourself is also not a failure. It's like an opportunity to grow, I think.
Totally. I really resonated with what you said about it's not, like it's kind of a privileged thing to talk about self-love. Like it's something that not a lot of people have can have access to. So yeah, I think that was a really important point. Yeah.
You made me think of how Australian it is to self-deprecate and put yourself down. That is the crux of our sense of humour and tall poppy syndrome and all that. So it's really refreshing to hear that you are proud to declare you're confident and that you enjoy yourself. So hopefully like tap that into my veins. Like I just want everybody to come energised after this chat. But you talked about privilege a little bit, and I want to discuss self-care, whether it is a privileged thing to do, because if I talk to my mum about self-care, she just like has no concept of it, like take a bath, like I don't have time for that. Yeah, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot about self-care that is inherently wrapped up in class and class privilege. I think to have the opportunity to even reflect on like where you're at in your life, if you're providing for like 4 kids and are a sole parent and are like earning a minimum wage, like you don't have time to go and buy a bath bomb and like even rent a house with a bath in it, like, or go on a nature walk, or, you know, I do think it can be a really privileged experience. And so I think holding space for the traumas that people have encountered that may position them differently from yourself is really important. And, you know, I think all of those intersections have a relationship with self-care and self-love. But I think appreciating your own company and finding value in your own voice and your own reality is something that hopefully is accessible to everyone at some point, even if there's way more obstacles to get in the way. And I think the more that we talk about these things and the more that we look at, rather than self-care, but community care and how to actually cultivate those spaces, then hopefully we can redistribute a lot of those privileges and that wealth and that opportunity so that there is more time. Like maybe if you have a friend who has a kid, babysitting their kid, and then maybe they can consider self-care because they've got community support to do that.
Yep, absolutely.
I think it's really interesting what you're talking about, because particularly the past few years, self-care has become something that's very pretty and very capitalist in that, bath bombs or buy this or go on this really expensive yoga retreat. And it's kind of gone too far the other way where we kind of have forgotten about community care and the fact that you can't kind of bubble bath your way out of oppression or all of these things that are
Get me that on a t-shirt.
Probably a bath bomb called oppression.
Honestly,
it sounds really...
And I think the fact that sometimes self-care doesn't look pretty or nice, sometimes, for me, the biggest self-care thing is taking my antidepressants, or it might be having a shower or doing your dishes or I think we do kind of need to go back or find that balance between self-care and community care where the onus isn't all on the individual to just sort your whole life out and just overcome everything you've dealt with.
And if I can just jump in really quickly, I also want to say that self-care is also self-work. It's also being open to feedback. It's also taking on that feedback. It's also being accountable to problematic actions. We are all capable of committing harm. And I think doing that work to ensure that we're safer people is self-care and is community care. And receiving honest feedback is also community care. I really try to tell people if they've made me feel uncomfortable and offer them that feedback so it's an opportunity to grow. And I think that's also a really big part of this. If you've just got people who are really polite around you all the time and are you're always right, babe, can't believe they did that, you're probably not being accountable to others and to yourself. Yeah.
And also the idea that if you are, harmful in any way, it's you need to do more self-care. You need to work on yourself more. And it's no, we still need to be caring for our community and those around us.
Yep. Agreed. Did you have anything to say about that, Laura?
Yeah, I think what you were saying about how self-care kind of looks different for so many people, I think that is such an important point. And self-care, the definition of self-care is going to change depending on the person, depending on the person's circumstance, and intersectionality plays a huge part in that. So I think just being really sensitive to that and just not kind of putting your definition of self-care onto someone else's.
Yep.
It's really important.
So we're going to hit the Q&A soon, but I've got a few specific questions for you, Laura, because when I told my friends I was doing this panel, everyone wanted to know about sex and relationships. And when you think me time, everybody thinks masturbation. So I think we have to go there because the questions might come up and maybe you're afraid to ask it. So tell us a little bit about some of the things you've been working on and the advice that you give around solo me time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So masturbation is very important for multiple reasons, not just for the idea that it is sexual, but also for things like sleep, things like stress control, bringing your anxiety under control as well. It helps you to feel good. It can be a place where you kind of go to feel at one with yourself, feel at one with your body. I feel really passionately about promoting masturbation because it is such an important part of health. And when you just take all of the stigma away that comes with sexuality and we just look at it kind of objectively for what it is and what it does for our bodies and our minds, I think it's a very, very important component of health and self-care.
Yep, absolutely. And some people I've chatted to, they date and rely heavily on the people they date or the sex that they're having. They equate that with confidence. And some of my friends want to know, how do they step away from that and find confidence within themselves? And this is also a question for the rest of you too.
Yeah, I think taking some time to be not passive in the way that you move through life. Take a moment, sit down, pen and paper if you have to, and write out what it is that you want in your life, who you want to see, the kind of people and the parts of yourself that you want to bring out when you're with other people, and be active in pursuing that. Don't just kind of like go kind of passively around and just think about it after. I think it's important to do that, because when you do that, then you'll start bringing in the kind of people in your life that are positive and have a good impact on who you are.
Yeah, I think I also really resonate with what you were saying earlier as well, about oh my God, I completely lost my train of thought. This is what happens post-lockdown. I'm like, can I even speak? I'll throw it to you and then I will go back.
Thrown it. I think as well, it's really, I've been in a relationship forever, and it's important, again, not to be passive in long-term relationships, and even if you haven't found a person or a community or friendships or whatever it is, to seek out that self-care in whatever way it may be, and don't just wait for these things and these moments of joy and pleasure to happen to you, and to still actively seek out your own company in whatever way you want. And yeah, make that time for yourself, so you're not just waiting for someone else to be making you feel good and, caring for you.
I remembered what I was going to say. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. What you were saying earlier about boundaries as well, I feel like I've been quite good at like performative confidence, but then actually really believing in myself has been much harder. And I think part of that has been because I have allowed people to cross my boundaries. And I think obviously like people crossing your boundaries is on them, but also if you have boundaries that you just keep moving the goalposts on, what that actually means is that you are constantly betraying yourself and your relationship with yourself, and your body knows that. So if you're like, my deal breaker is if you do this, and then that person does that, and you're like, oh, well, my deal breaker is actually this now. It's actually a way of betraying yourself over and over again. And yeah, obviously that person is maybe a bit shit, but like, at the end of the day, no one is responsible for upholding your boundaries as much as you are. They're your boundaries. If you actually want to keep them intact and you want to honor your relationship with yourself, you have to be the enforcer of those boundaries. And I think learning that really changed my confidence level a little bit, because I was like, I don't have to be malleable to everyone around me. I don't have to fit their shape in order to be worthy. I can hold my own shape, and maybe we're just not a good match. And I think that's really changed the way I see things. Because even with friendships, like we surround ourselves with people who actually often make us feel shit about ourselves, and we leave an interaction feeling really drained. And it's not until we've maybe sat down with pen and paper that we're like, who serves us and who doesn't? And realizing that we have people in our lives who cross our boundaries, whether it's like at work, because work relationships can be really fucked, family, romantic, like it's not just about romantic relationships, it's sort of everywhere. So I think me really holding my boundaries strong after having them crossed many times and moving them many times has been the thing that's honored me, because I get home and I'm like, wow, you really had your own back when no one else did, and I really needed you to, and I'm so grateful that you did.
And enforcing not only your own boundaries, but your own joy, and realizing that you can take control of that in a community and in friendships and in relationships. And again, not just waiting for other people to make that happen for you, actually seeking that out no matter how many people are around you.
And Laura, before we started this panel, you were mentioning that you're kind of an expert on taking time off, even if you are in a relationship. So we had quite a fair amount of people in the audience who are in relationships. How is it that we can still preserve that fire by being apart?
Yeah, I think being apart is really important when you are in a relationship, because, as I said before, you kind of understand yourself through another person. So if you're constantly around another person, you kind of you would just completely understand yourself through them. So it's very important to take a break and to understand, to get back in touch with who you are and make that really solid, so that when you can be with them, you can be yourself. Because really, if you're in a relationship with someone, they're with you for a reason. So be that person that they're with. Be the person that they fell in love with. I think it's really important to maintain that sense of identity.
And before we go to the Q&A, I would love to know about your experiences with breakups and how to bounce back from them, because Navor, you had a great story there, relatable, because I did a comedy show online during lockdown that was about rebuilding myself after a breakup. And I feel like finding new hobbies was my go-to, but you might have had different experiences, so I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, my breakup totally broke me. And I feel like there's this like weird like expiration date on how long you can talk about it with your friends before they will like no longer put up with you at all. How long you can talk about it with your therapist before they'll no longer put up with you at all. And you like have to get other traumas and pains or something. I think for me it was also really hard because it was like a historic wound. Like my partner really triggered my relationship with my dad. Don't we all date our wounded parents? And so that was like a lot of like inner child work that needed to be done. And so I guess I did a lot of like meditation on what loneliness is and how to find like a light within yourself and satiated within your own relationship. And I found that really helpful. I think also like spending time with friends that I was like, wow, you don't put me down and you're really lovely and I don't have to feel that way. Getting to bitch about my ex heaps was awesome. Anger is a healing emotion.
Is that with friends? Where did you go?
Yes, with friends, by myself, like in the mirror, whatever, wherever I could get it.
Mine was actually every time I drive past my ex's house, I would flip the bird and be like, F you, Nick. That is his real name. And I'd make my friends do it with me. So if they were riding in the car, we'd be like, we're going to do it together. Here it comes. Ready? Fuck yeah.
Fuck you, Nick.
Like he'd never know, but it was very cathartic.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, we all find different ways to work through that stuff. I think what's been really important for me is that expiration date doesn't exist and that like I am so fine for like 3 months and then I have a nightmare about her where she's like really fucking nice to me and then I wake up and I'm right back in it. And I will go around on panels and with my friends and be like, healing is not linear. And then I'm like, why is this not a progressive linear journey? And like, it's just a contradiction that I live in. And having those reminders all the time is like really brutal, but it's just true. Like, it's not linear. There's so many different layers that come up. Relationships are really scary and hard and like raw. They rest on our like most formative years of our life where we developed our attachment styles. Like, they have so much to do with our parents' relationships. Like, there's intergenerational trauma. Like, there is so much there. And I think really what Laura was saying earlier of just like genuinely through the entire self-care process, being kind to yourself and being gentle with yourself is the number one way to like get there, even if it's non-linear. Because I think I've done, like, there's been times where I've been like, I'm going to really work on my perfectionism this year. I'm going to like do this, this, and this, and this. And my friend's like, it sounds like you're using your perfectionism to work on that same thing, you know? And
yeah, I need goals. I need a to-do list.
Yeah, like if I just finish this to-do list, I won't be a perfectionist anymore. Yeah. It's like, it's not how it works. So if you really want to like look into self-care and self-love, literally, as cliche as it sounds, the first step is like being kind to yourself when you fuck it up. And once you start being kind when you're getting it wrong, you will be kind all of the time. And so I think even now when I cry to my therapist about my breakup when she's like, are we done with this? And I'm like, no.
3 more sessions, please.
Yeah, please. Put it on my Medicare. 20 sessions for COVID, more like 20 sessions for my breakup. So I think, yeah, being nice to myself about that and being like, that's just what I need. And like these like kind of inventions of time and how many sessions it takes and how many months is just like not serving anyone.
Yeah. From a professional perspective, Laura, how have you given advice about breakups to people?
Yeah, I think it's really about going through the motions, giving all of those crap feelings a lot of space and letting them happen, because you don't want to end up a few months later and be like, shit, I did not deal with those. So I think having a really supportive group of friends around you, and I understand what you're saying about, having that expiry date when you can't talk about it anymore. I think maybe like tactically being like, okay, that friend I'm going to reach
Pepper
out
it in.
But yeah, no, I think like having that really good self-care routine, having a good social like support network, having healthcare professionals who can be there for you. Yeah, I think it's just having a whole team of people around you, really.
Yeah, thanks for that. What about you, Sam? You've been in a long-term relationship for a while.
It's so boring. I've never had a breakup. I'm so sorry.
Never, ever.
Never, ever, ever.
Fantastic.
You talk about loneliness. I can't talk about breakup.
Yeah, well, if you've got any final comments before we go to the audience, please share them now. Open to anything that we've discussed, if there was anything burning in your mind.
I mean, I can just quickly say that, like, I don't think having, like, a rebound is, like, the best advice that I can give you. But after dating my awful ex, I had a rebound of sorts. And I think actually dating someone who was kind of similar to my ex in the fact that they were like avoidant and not in love with me in the same way that I was, but having her be really gentle and loving and kind to me made me realize that just because someone doesn't love me doesn't mean they can be a fucking asshole. And that was actually really healing. I was like, wow, I deserve softness and I deserve, like, my emotions don't make me weak, and I'm allowed, and my like perception of reality is valid. If you ever get someone who speaks to you as if their perception of reality is objective, leave them immediately, because it is just like really manipulative behavior. And I think having someone who is like, yeah, that's so valid that you feel that way, I don't feel that way, both of those narratives are real, let's find something in the middle, or maybe we're not suited to each other, was also like really healing.
Dishing out the tough love. So if you want some of that realness, please ask your questions now. Should we get a microphone, or do you want me to? Yep, we have a roving mic. So put your hand up if you've got something on your brain that you'd like to ask.
Hi guys.
Hi.
Well, that's loud.
What's your name and what's your question?
Okay, my name's Brad. I have a question about, I think that everyone who's here is here because they have at least some vague awareness that they can improve in some areas. But I want to know if you have advice for people when we get to a position in our lives where we think that we're okay and everything's kind of going okay and we're on a good wicket, and maybe we get complacent or even arrogant, you know what I mean? And what is your advice for continuing to have that awareness and self-care and understanding for ourselves?
Cool, thanks, Brad.
Thanks.
I would say like ride that wave. If it's working for you at that time, just keep it going. And when hiccups come, be as I said before, curious, be kind to those hiccups. If if that kind of breaks down, that idea that you've got everything together, it's not like a dichotomy. It's not like you're either together or you're not. It's like you're still together, but you're just having a little diversion, and you can pick that, look into it, spend some time, give it some space, and then you can go back to being that self. I think, just riding the wave of that is what would be my advice, is to do that.
I think something I find really helpful is any forms of self-care or things that you do just for yourself and just for joy. I know it sounds really boring, but actually scheduling those into your daily or weekly routine, because it can get really easy to get complacent and be like, oh, I really enjoy doing that, but I'm happy in this other part of my life, so I'm not going to do that for a while. Whereas, if you say, I'm going to take myself out for a coffee every Tuesday morning, and you do that really ritualistically, that you might not notice that ritual in the good times, but in the bad times, it's there and it's something you're so used to doing that you'll keep doing it. It sounds really boring, but just schedule that shit in to your
practical advice
daily.
is good. We need that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really keen on preventative measures. I don't necessarily really love exercise all the time, but I know that if I'm not doing it consistently, my brain will get angry at me. And I feel like there's a lot of things that I do all the time to just maintain myself as a human. And then if I'm doing those things and I'm feeling pretty good, that's great. Like life is, you're allowed to enjoy it and you're like allowed to be happy. I think that's something I'm like trying to remind myself when I'm like kayaking and I'm like, this is the most beautiful thing in the world. What have I ever done to deserve this? And then I'm like, I'm allowed to just have a good time, you know? And I think if you're like constantly seeking like someone will bring you that joy or someone will complete your life, then it'll just never happen because you're always seeking the next thing. So I think also, yeah, as you said, like embracing that, really breathing through slowness and allowing yourself to just enjoy simple pleasures, I think is really important. But yeah, preventative measures I think are crucial, not waiting for a breakdown. Like seeing a therapist all the time, even if you're not in crisis. I think that's, I try to tell my mum that and she's like, but I'm fine. I'll go when it's not okay. And I'm like, that's not the time you want to be getting a mental health care plan and trying to find someone.
Into a car. No. That was a great question. Thank you for that. Anyone else? Yep, up the back, over here. More thinking time for anyone else who has a question as well.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Ashani. My question is for all of you. I was in a domestically abusive relationship, and my question is, what are the tips for forgiving yourself for staying far too long in something that was actually really, really bad? Like you talked about betrayal and betraying yourself and, letting someone break through your boundaries over and over again. So I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing something so personal here at this public forum as well.
I think, in those kind of relationships, it's never you that's staying. There's always more to it than that. Even though, like, physically you could walk out, like, potentially, but it's actually, there's emotional manipulation and things like that. So I think taking the responsibility away, because it's a very hard situation and a lot of people do stay in those kinds of relationships. And it's not that it was your fault to do that. It's that you were manipulated to do that. Perhaps, I don't know, like, your whole story, but I think really be kind to yourself. Like, it's a lot of domestic abuse relationships can be extremely hard to kind of process after. So I think when those emotions come up, just give them space and be kind to them. Just say, like, it's okay that I feel this and I am going to get through this. Yeah.
Are there any resources that you could recommend or what you found might be helpful in the aftermath?
That's a really good question. I actually don't have any right now, but I would love to, if I could post them somewhere.
Yeah, your own Instagram perhaps, which we'll plug at the end of this chat would be great.
I mean, there are so many communities and other people out there, and there are so many barriers to leaving and so many systemic things that make it so difficult. And I think, even if it is through like something like social media, but finding those communities of survivors and people who have left abusive or toxic relationships, finding other people who are going through similar things, I guess just as a reminder that it's not you, it's not a personal failing on you, it's something that happens to so many people. And I think, one great thing about social media are there's so many different communities of people who have experienced similar things to you, whatever that lived experience might be. And, I think actively seeking out those communities and people who have been through similar situations so you can go, oh, this isn't just me, I'm not alone in this. And also, maybe even doing like some research on all of the different barriers and the reasons that people aren't able to leave those relationships, and just reassuring yourself that it's not a personal failing on you, it's something that unfortunately happens to so many people. And I think, there are so many people out there who, can offer that sense of community and support.
Yeah, thank you. Did you have anything to add to that before I go back to a couple more questions?
I've never been in a domestically abusive relationship, but I have been in an abusive relationship with a parent, and I think that whole like betraying your boundaries thing is easy to say when you know what those boundaries are, but it's really, really different when you don't know what they are and when you almost have to have them crossed in order to know what they are then. And I think like forgiveness is a really big part of that. I think understanding the role that the other person plays in that. And I think for me, I play out a lot of patterns that I had in my relationship with my dad over and over again. And what I've started to acknowledge is that life is just a bit of a velodrome and you're kind of always going around the circle. And if you keep punishing yourself for going around the circle itself, you're just going to always be in a punishment state. But if instead you look at like, oh, this time I'm going around the bend, I know there's a rock there, so I'm going to move a bit to the left. And this time I'm like doing this a bit differently. And rather than punishing yourself for the pattern that you're engaging in, actually rewarding yourself for the slight differences you're making each time. And the one time that you're like, actually that's a boundary, don't cross that. Or the one time that you're just pivoting a little to the left, you're noticing those red flags. It's not something that you can just do a 180 overnight. It is a really big process, and I do believe that like patterns repeat themselves in lots of ways, not because of who you are as a person or because of your own like flaws or anything like that, but rather that's just a little bit how the world works and how our relationship styles work. And so I think noticing when you're doing something differently and when you are putting yourself first and when you are valuing yourself, it's almost like a positive reinforcement where you will kind of keep rewarding yourself for that rather than looking at the bad things. But also like that's so much easier said than done, and it's really fucking hard. And I think it's like a really difficult process. And I think asking that question and like being vulnerable and leaning into how challenging that is like already 75% of the journey.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah, thank you again for sharing, Ashani, and hopefully that was useful to you and something that you can take away. We have one more question available to use up our time before we wrap up. So if you've got something that you really want to ask, raise your hand now and we'll get to that. Otherwise, we can hopefully answer your questions via DMs on the socials, or you could write a letter or something where we'll give plugs shortly after this. Yep, one down the back.
Hi, my name's Matilda. Just a quick question to wrap it all up. It's quite cliche, but I like hearing the responses. What advice would you guys give to your younger selves in terms of self-care and like the journey you've been on? And as you mentioned that in your early 20s, in your late teens, that's where you like struggled most with it and with past relationships. So looking back on it, because like all of us are quite young, what quick advice would you give that like past experience of what you've been through?
Great question. Thanks. Good one to end on as well.
I think for me, I mean, what kind of snapped me out of kind of self-hatred and moving to the beginning of my journey with self-love was just the realization, and this is what I would tell my younger self a lot younger, that, you are the person that you're going to spend the most time with in the world. Like, even if you're in a long-term relationship, even with family, like, and I think lockdown has proven that as well. Like, no matter how strong your community and your relationships are, like, you are the person you're going to be connected to the most. So enjoy that. And I don't know. I also find that, like, I think the other advice I would give to myself is just, like, stop wasting so much time hating yourself. Like, there are so many better things you could be doing with your time, like eating food and doing craft and watching TV. Like, it's, when I look back of how much time and energy I invested into hating myself, like, that time is just better spent. Like, even if it's not necessarily loving yourself, just like, don't have to think about yourself 24/7, just, yeah.
Yeah, cool. We'll have to speed through, so maybe a 30-second summary from both of you.
I would say listen to your body, because I used to like intellectualize so much when I was younger. I'd be like, is this the right thing to do? Is that the right thing to do? Do I like this? Does that person like think I'm doing the right thing? And I would never just like listen to what my body said. Like, did it feel happy when I would try something? Did it feel afraid? I would just never listen to those things. I would just like be all up here. So that would definitely be my biggest thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I have different advice for different versions of myself, but I think the like overarching theme is you are the author of your own story. No one gets to write that for you. You're the boss. It's your story.
Yeah, thank you. And my advice would be similar to something you said earlier, Navo, where you said you're the only person who has your back. And I think having my own back throughout my 20s, a tumultuous time, like, I think that really helped. And you can't help other people unless you've been topped up yourself. So yeah, we're going to wrap up there. My name is Annie Louie. I didn't even introduce myself properly at the start, but maybe better, so there was no pressure. I'm a comedian. You can find me on my website, annielouie.com. If you've got something that you'd like to plug as well, where we can find you if you've got more questions, please do. Sam?
Yeah, so you can find me at Mossfolk through our Instagram at mossfolk_. I'll be there.
All my social media is my name, so Novozison, and I've got a new book coming out next month called The Pronoun Lowdown, and it's all about pronouns and gender in different languages and 100 years of trans history, and it's pretty fun and colourful, so check it out if you want.
Yeah, and you can find me on Instagram at Laura Miano Sexology.
Excellent. Please give it up for your panelists for tonight. Thank you so much to MPavilion for having us, and also for Sophie Cochrane, who is part of the M Curators group and put this all together. There's going to be a movie screening after this, so if you're interested in that, please talk to the organisers who are wearing black t-shirts. But otherwise, give yourselves a big round of applause. Thank you so much for coming out on this very hot night to hang out in a car park. Check out more MPavilion events by going to their website, but I'll let you all go. Thanks so much.